we are going to move into our next phase, and this is the Ask the Doc phase. You going to talk a little bit about the question we got?
Yeah, so the question comes in, why does my shoulder hurt, Doc, when I bench press? So there's a lot of different things that go on with us positioning before we even take the bar off of the J-hooks, or if we're taking dumbbells up overhead. If you guys got to think about is the relationship between the scapula and the humerus. So your shoulder blade and the bone that comes out from your shoulder and extends down obviously to the forearm and then the hand. So why don't we talk about scapulohumeral rhythm first, and we'll go from there.
And you can get really complex with a lot of ratios. And, you know, as I sit here, I talk about what the literature says. I'm going to read a little bit on this, so I apologize, but it says it's described like a ratio, some humeral elevation compared to scapulothoracic rotation. The overall ratio of 2-to-1 during arm elevation is commonly used. According to that, it says that flexion or abduction of 90 degrees in relationship to the thorax would be accomplished through approximately 60 degrees of glenohumeral movement and 30 degrees of scapulothoracic movement. Another one, they say at the mean ratio at this for the scapular plane was 2 to 4 or 2.4 to 1 for adults and 1.3 to 1 for children. All that's a bunch of science-y stuff, but what does that mean to you? Okay, so what this means to you is what we want to do is when we're abducting our arm, whether it be abduction or even flexion, it kind of goes to that too. We want to use the delt more than the trap to initiate the movement. So what my rule for my patients is that the first 60 degrees of abduction, which is moving your arm away from your body, I know you can see it on our YouTube video, but you can't see it on the podcast, or flexion, which is moving your arm up forward. The first 60 degrees, we don't want to have any trapezius involvement. We want to have predominantly the delt causing that motion. And then after 60 degrees away from the body to the side or to the front, then the trap and the delt can work in a 1-to-1 ratio. Okay. Why that is so important is because it accomplishes rotation of the shoulder blade. And when that shoulder blade cannot rotate, what ends up happening is you have your arm bone, your humerus, and it starts slamming into the shoulder blade, and in between there are those delicate little tendons of your rotator cuff muscles and to an extent your bicep tendon. We start pinching on those, and now we get pain. Okay, this is called a functional impingement. When we go to set up for a bench, like you were saying, if we don't watch how we get up there, if we use that trap to get up there, now we have elevated our shoulder blade and now it won't rotate. So that's when we run into problems. And that creates a chronic inflammatory change. It creates a lot of pain. It can stab in there. And you won't really see a whole lot of it on an MRI because an MRI is static. You might see some inflammation. And then what are you going to get diagnosed with? Tendinitis. You have rotator cuff tendinitis. You need a cortisone shot. And then what does a cortisone shot do? It weakens the tissue. Next thing you know, that turns into a tear. Ultimately, the most important thing is how you move your arm. And it's funny because, again, on YouTube, you're going to be able to see this, but you'll see people and they say, I have great range of motion. And they're totally shrugged up with that trap and they're getting virtually no delt motion. What I have my patients do is in their head start thinking about inhibiting the trap a little bit by pushing down slightly and get a downward scoop and then use that delt. So whether that be, again, inflection going forward or abduction going out to the side, get a little bit of a downward scoop until that neurologic pattern is kind of built back in.
I love that. So in a previous episode here on our show, I talked about when we were doing behind the neck pull downs. And for me, because I've torn up a shoulder, and I'm sure there's a lot of viewers out there who don't have, perfect symmetry bilaterally, sometimes I'll go and I'll opt for more dumbbell work when we do bench press. So that way I can customize that range of motion per side. And what I mean by that is when Craig alluded to us, depressing that shoulder blade on my left side, I don't even have to think about it because that one just feels real natural. On my right side, I really got to focus in on that. But me having that with the dumbbells allows me to kind of customize that more. It definitely feels way less pain, if anything at all. And on top of that too, it also allows me to focus in on where my mobility may lack. So we get into some of these which we can, film a video or two. That trap loves to kick in on my right side, especially when I do anything overhead pressing or horizontal pressing. And that also happens too. We can talk about like any horizontal pulling down the road. But those are the common areas that I see that really need to be kind of focused in on. But then once it is locked in, it fires just like the other side, but it's just being mindful of that movement.
there's a couple tactics that I'll make sure to use. First off, I don't flat bench anymore. Okay, I'm not a power lifter anymore, so I don't flat bench. I'm either using a machine or dumbbells. So by not having the thumbs facing each other, okay, that puts us in a little bit more of internal rotation of the arm, and it's more likely to elevate that trap. If you come to about a 45 degree or even go to a full reverse, if you love bench, you can go to a full reverse and do an underhand, and it's tough. And at first you're going to feel really awkward. It's not going to feel right, but it ends up getting strong pretty fast, and you won't chronically impinge that.
I love that move. The underhand move feels great, but you have to be humbled by dropping the weight because it's not the same as what you're used to. Yeah.
And I always tell my patients that if I get to meet God someday or a supreme creator, I'm going to ask, my first question I think is, why when we are injured is our tendency to suck this shoulder blade up and actually overactivate the trap? Because in reality, that's what got us in the problem in the first place. One of the few things that I find as a true flaw with the way our body works, it goes into protect mode, and then we start using that trap more. And I really don't understand that dynamic.
One more thing too is, from a chiropractic aspect, how many people, if let's go to the gym in our minds for a second, when they bench press, you see the head pop off the bench. And then on top of that too, if there's no motion in your T-spine or virtually no motion, how common is it for us to constantly have to adjust that area on people? But when we free it up, it's like all of a sudden, boom, they got that range of motion back.
Right, and you have to have it. So whether it be incorporating foam roll or dynamic ball, or just watching the head. And again, we've talked about posture so many times in this podcast, and guess what? We're going to continue to talk about it because it's so freaking important. But if you're constantly in a forward head flex position, you're going to constantly be flexing that thoracic spine, and you will lose mobility. So whether it be chiropractic, foam roll, exercise, PT, whatever you've got, mobilization techniques, you're going to have to figure out a way to get that extension through there if bench press is something that you ultimately want to do. And bench press is just one example. I mean, we can see the same thing in overhead movements and a ton of different shoulder movements, but chest is kind of the big one, and that was our specific question for this round.